Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Fringe Talkback. My name is Kate Coley, and I'm the Talkback producer for Cincy Fringe 2020, which means that if you're watching a Talkback, you're going to see me there, and I'll be the one asking questions to our wonderful Fringe artists. I am here today with the writer, creator, performer of Occupy This. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Tommy, we can get started with some questions. Oh, you're still muted.
And I've already made a mistake just that quickly. I like to get the screw-ups right out of the way, or just continue from the beginning and screw up the rest of the time too.
No worries.
My name's Tommy Nugent. I was the artist formerly known as the Reverend Nuge when I retired 5 years ago. But apparently this marks my low-key comeback. So I am the Reverend Nuge once again, it appears.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in writing and storytelling and how this particular experience went from being a life experience to a play that you could take on the road and perform.
Yeah, so boy, me being on stage, communicating my understanding of truth to audiences goes way back. The Reverend comes from, I was an actual minister at age of 21. And then from there, I swerved. I thought maybe I'd go to law school, which would be a different kind of way for me to be in front of an audience, is kind of the way I looked at it, which is why I moved to Cincinnati. And my law school career lasted even shorter time than my ministerial career did. I think I was in UC Law for about 45 days. And I wanted to find my way back on stage. I also wanted to work with young people. So I toured as a school assembly speaker for 17 years. So I had a magic and motivation show that I did in middle schools and high schools all across the country. And I had a passion in the midst of that. Like, that was the job and I loved it. And I loved the rush of being on that stage. But I wanted more freedom in my artistic expression than, just doing anti-bullying talks or whatever it might be. So as a kid, I saw Whoopi Goldberg's One Woman Show, and that kind of like stuck with me. And then later on, I saw John Leguizamo's, and I was like, I want to do what that guy's doing, but I don't do characters and I don't dance. So I was like, I can't really do what that guy's doing. And then I saw Defending the Caveman, and that was just a guy, Rob Decker, standing on stage holding an audience for an hour. And it wasn't stand-up comedy, it was storytelling. And I thought maybe I could do that. So I was trying to hone my chops a little bit as an actor, and did a production with No Theater back in 2000, something like 99, something like that. And I pitched an idea for a one-man show to Jay Calagian, and he went for it. So they put up my one-man show back in 2002. Was the first solo show that the No ever did. And then I did it, and then had nothing else to do for 5 years until I started hearing about Fringe. And then in 2007, I went down and did my first Fringe show. And then I was on the Fringe circuit for about 8 years after that.
Great. Wow, thank you. So a storied past, including a little bit of the No in there too. That's wonderful. Yeah. So you mentioned a few of your early inspirations that got you sort of thinking about solo performance and solo storytelling. I'm curious if you have any current inspirations, if there's other solo acts you've seen recently that have inspired you as a writer, as a storyteller.
When I retired, it kind of stuck. I've goofed on friends that have tried to leave the Fringe circuit before, and they sit out a season and then come back. So I did my last solo show in 2014. So I really haven't caught a lot of new people out there, but beyond like Leguizamo, going back to Eric Bogosian and Spalding Gray were ones that really kind of stuck with me over the years.
Great.
And
thanks.
my friends on the circuit, I've
Right.
got a lot of great and talented friends, so it's good to pop back in, and been watching some of their shows online during this Fringe.
Yeah, very cool. So this is a Fringe flashback. Occupy This is a Fringe flashback, which premiered in Cincinnati in 2012. Obviously, a lot has changed since 2012. And so I'm curious about how your perspective on this show and the idea of activism has changed over those past 8 years.
Yeah, so I hadn't watched the show for about 5 years until this afternoon. I figured
Great.
it wouldn't be fair to come into this talk back without having seen it for half a decade. And I'm one of those cringers as I watch myself on video. But I'm proud of the show. This was always my favorite monologue. I did 7 monologues, and this was my favorite one. And honestly, for about the first year after the Occupy was kind of snuffed out, and we did the home foreclosure defenses, and was involved for a while. And honestly, I kind of petered out in my activism in the same way that Occupy kind of crested and rolled back. Raising 2 kids and trying to pay the bills. And I feel one of the reasons I was hesitant to watch Occupy again is I knew I would be, as from the old ministerial days, feel convicted in my lack of activism, especially with what's going on today. And when I submitted the Occupy show, I had no idea that there would be worldwide protests, for a different subject. But that was kind of the last big international wave of protests, was probably the Occupy movement. And when Black Lives Matter a couple of years ago. But otherwise, it kind of goes back to Occupy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious about, this show very much shows us how a big group of individuals are fighting against these major corporations and how they can have real and noticeable direct change, especially when threatened with bad publicity. So I'm curious about what you think we can continue to do to sort of keep the Occupy movement alive, keep those anti-exploitation efforts alive, as individuals still, even though, as you mentioned, the Occupy movement itself is has petered out over time.
One thing that Occupy did better and worse jobs of it when it first took off is tapping into the organizations that are already there. I make a reference to a guy named Chris in the show that was an activist going back to the Vietnam War. And one of the first things he said when we met is, don't think you guys started this shit. A lot of us have been around a while. And I think that's the thing, is to tap into the people that have been fighting the battles and find, which local organization can you support rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every time. And direct action, whether it's getting in the street, whether it is phone banks, in our case, we called the banks to try and convince them not to foreclose on somebody. And, we'd run that and, email campaigns to congressmen, but tapping into what's already there and looking to the activism that's proven, effective over the years is better than just going it alone every new time something new pops up.
Yeah, absolutely. Not reinventing the wheel. I like that. So this show also talks a lot about your relationship to Detroit and your involvement there. You're still living just outside of Detroit, you said. I think that something special about this year's Fringe is that, especially through these talkbacks and getting to learn a little bit about sort of the environments that these different creators come from when they bring their shows to Cincy Fringe, either virtually or in real life. And so I would love if you could tell us a little bit about, what you think defines your Detroit experience, what it's like to be an artist there, what sort of the feel of it is.
So I was raised in the same suburb I moved back to 2 years ago, Taylor, Michigan. I said about 15 minutes outside the city. And, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when I grew up, Detroit was a rough spot. Downtown was essentially a ghost town, and, more than half the population had moved out over the years. So there's been something of a comeback, but as what happens, a little bit of a gentrification thing, like the downtown corridor. What's the guy? The guy who owns Quicken Loans, Dan Gilbert. He essentially has a private army of police that patrols downtown. So you see 2 by 2 what look like armed police walking around, but it's his private security. And it has cut down crime. Like, downtown is absolutely safe. It feels like a little bit of power, more power than one man should have, though. Even I talk about the theater that I performed in. It was adjacent to a coffee shop in my show, Occupy This. And that building, Dan Gilbert's people were going around and they screwed in security cameras to that building without anybody's permission.
Wow.
And just that attitude of, well, I'm helping so I can do what I want. And that a lot of people have been displaced, and a lot of the communities, the change hasn't come to. You can drive around lots of parts of Detroit where it's just, still abandoned house after abandoned house. They've knocked thousands of them down since the new mayor came to office. But where tourist has been built up in bar districts and things, there's still so much work that needs to be done in the neighborhoods, and just folks are, really struggling, really having a rough time. And especially, I don't know what's going to happen, coming out of this pandemic, because, the people that can least afford to take the hit are typically the ones that get the biggest hit.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's, something that we see even in the neighborhood of the No itself and Over the Rhine, is that it depends on who you ask, who talks about it as gentrification, and who talks about, the resurgence of Over the Rhine, how it's so much safer now. So there's always two sides of that coin,
Sure.
and what exactly that, urban development actually means. We just got a question from an audience, two audience members, Ricky and Dana. And they want to know if you feel like storytelling keeps the activist spirit alive.
Yeah. Kind of everything is stories. The Bible is stories. History is stories. Most art is storytelling, even if it's not the obvious, man or woman standing on stage spinning a tale. Songs tell a story. Obviously, movies tell a story, and that's it was always the narratives that made a difference, even in Occupy. If I could tell the story of, Chris, the Vietnam vet, single father who's going to get thrown out of his home by Citibank. Narrative is the thing, and that's a great question. I think it really is how we carry what's been done in the past forward, so we can learn from and build on those things. And it comes down to real people, and real people's stories is what activism needs to be about.
Yeah, I think, I totally agree too. I think that those personal stories, and I think we see that too, even with just like social media as a form of storytelling. It's like, if this person on social media has this platform on like Twitter or something, they can make a Twitter thread and say, here's my experience. I've seen a lot of that at recent protests about like, I'm going to post 10 tweets about what I went through. And that's, one of the most potent things to keep us feisty and fighting against injustice. Thank you for that question, Ricky and Dana. Always appreciate it. So we talked a little bit about Detroit sort of as, what it is politically. I'm curious about what your experience has been sort of on the artistic scene of Detroit. You talk about in this show about, the hometown show and what that means. And so I just love to know a little bit more about what your experience was like in the arts piece.
Yeah, I've done little things. It's kind of, I didn't see coming, but where I've swerved back in the entertainment was as a magician. Even more than doing the one-man shows, I've had different opportunities that just popped up. Somebody that saw me on the Fringe Festival in London, Ontario, in Windsor, Ontario, was a street magician, because they also had, with the Fringe Festival, they had a street festival too of street performers. And he was doing magic at Motor City Casino, and they were hiring more magicians. And at that time, I was doing storytelling, but I hadn't touched magic in forever. And he's like, you need to send my boss, my agent, an audition tape. We're hiring more magicians. And I was like, man, I haven't done magic in 10 years. He said, well, it's a 4-hour shift and it's $100 an hour. And I said, I can do magic again.
Yeah.
And just weirdly, yes, I've performed as a magician more than I have as a storyteller or as an actor or a comedian over the years.
Yeah. What is that like? How does it compare to the Fringe circuit or storytelling circuits? It's obviously a, similar but different kind of art form and entertainment form.
I was, for a long time, because my school show, that was my hook.
Right.
Why are they going to hire me to come talk to kids? And I was like, I used to be a hobbyist magician in college. And I was like, oh, maybe if I wrap a magic act into it. So my 45-minute talk, I did 5 magic tricks, and I closed with a straitjacket escape. I started so long ago. Over the whole 17 years, I closed my show to a straitjacket escape to Bon Jovi's "It's My Life." And when I started, it was a new release. But if I never hear that song again, especially while wrapped up in canvas, that'll be all right with me. But I wanted to get I didn't know if I could hold an audience without it. I had done,
Mm,
5 tricks in 45 minutes that I was really like scared about. Can I hold an audience? And even my first Fringe show, I bookended it. I opened with a magic
mm,
trick and closed with a magic trick just because I still wasn't fully sure. And then, the next year I dropped those out and
mm.
seemed to be able to still hold an audience without it. But it was like an anchor for me, and it's
Yeah.
tough to let it go. And it's cool to be able to come back to it without much attachment, and just kind of do it for fun or for hobby.
That's great. That's so interesting. And I bet every time you hear that song in the grocery store, you twitch a little bit.
Right, right. I know the cues. I know exactly what buckle needs to come off
Yep.
at what note.
So we have another audience question from Kurt who wants to know if you miss being a touring performer.
Well, yeah, for sure. So I I jumped into driving Lyft and Uber. I thought it would be 1 or 2 years at the most until I relaunched back into a performer of one kind or another, and that was now 5 years and 10,000 rides ago.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so still have the bug, and this is, like I said, my low key comeback. I think from here I'm going to pursue the stage again, and the great capper to my solo career is that I was able to tour a one man or a two-hander show for the first time ever. I didn't know if I could
Oh.
work with somebody else on stage. And the great Kurt Fitzpatrick dragged me into a farewell tour where we jam packed 5 cities in 18 months. And that was one of the best times of my life. And it was a great way to kind of tip the hat to the Fringe circuit.
Wonderful. Well, I bet Kurt will be very glad to hear that that was such a wonderful experience. Um, so, with our last couple of minutes, you mentioned you're coming back up. I like to ask all our artists how we can support them in their work moving forward. And I also want to ask you as well, what causes you think we should be supporting if you want to plug any organizations. Yeah, any way we can support you, your beliefs, and your work.
I appreciate that so much. I mean, kind of just keep an eye out for me. I'm also, might pitch in the general direction of the no thing that's been going through my head is maybe a low key casual thing. Monday night Nuge. Maybe I can come down and do a couple Mondays a month or something.
Uh
It's a
huh.
pretty easy drive, and my girlfriend lives in Dayton, so that would be cool.
Perfect.
But I would just, follow your heart. It sounds cliche as it fell out of my mouth, but it's true. And if it's the police brutality thing that's going on now, then jump into that. Find your own cause. And what rings true. Um, I forgot that I had a part in my show where I talked about my old Zen teacher had something she
Hmm.
called the Butler's mantra, and
Yes.
that's like a butler, except just quietly in your head. Whenever you're interacting with a human being throughout the day, you're kind of asking yourself, "How may I serve you?" And even as a Lyft driver, I try to bring that approach to it. I'm out there earning my living or whatever, but I also try to be, a little bit of light, a little bit of a blessing in people's lives, in just, the small way. But when you lean into that Butler's mantra, where it's first time I ever did it, it was just like a 1 day exercise. And I thought it was going to be
Hmm.
exhausting, right? To spend a whole day going, how can I serve you? How can I serve you? But I found great freedom and energy with it. And I try to make that, it was a one time, I thought it was going to be a one-time, 1 day experiment.
Hmm.
But it's really like how I try to make my default setting in life, that when I'm interacting with people, if it's a smile, if it's holding the door, if it's a little donation, what can I do to serve the people around me? And I think, if we all kind of lean in that direction, then that's how changes get made.
Well, that I think is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Tommy, for joining, for hopefully, going back a little bit into the Cincinnati community and for having this way of sharing your art with us digitally. It's really exciting. And I really appreciate, all your honest commentary and answers and stuff. Everyone watching, make sure you are staying tuned on the Cincy Fringe Facebook page and on our website, cincyfringe.com. If you want to watch any other talkbacks that I've done, those are all archived on the website. And there are many more upcoming if you check out the Weird Watch Guide and the Facebook page as well. Thank you again, Tommy. I really appreciate it. And I will see all of you at 6 o'clock for my next talkback.